Salmon Creek John Doe. The mystery that refused to stay buried on a quiet summer day in California. A family set out on what should have been a simple, peaceful beach outing. They were looking for nothing more than seashells and sunshine on Salmon Creek State Beach in Sonoma County, but what they discovered in the sand that afternoon would unlock a mystery that had haunted investigators for nearly a quarter-century and would lead to one of the strangest cases of mistaken identity ever recorded. It started with a bone. Just one. On June 17, 2022, as the family combed through the beach, they spotted something unusual protruding from the sand. It was a long bone, weathered by time and the ocean, its surface marked by surgical hardware. When authorities examined it, they determined it was likely a tibia, a shin bone, but nothing more. The initial search of the area yielded no other remains, no skull, no identification documents, no personal effects, just this single bone stripped of context, stripped of identity. The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office faced an immediate problem. Without additional remains or identifying information, there was no way to determine who this bone belonged to. The victim had no name, no face, no story. In the investigative world, this person became another statistic, another John Doe, added to the thousands of unidentified remains scattered across the country's forensic databases. But what the sheriff's office didn't know was that the answer to this mystery didn't rest in traditional investigative techniques alone. The solution would require the work of a remarkable organization staffed entirely by volunteers, experts in a field that didn't even exist a decade ago. It would require genetic genealogy, database cross-referencing, and the kind of patient, methodical detective work that can take months or years to yield results. And in this case, it would take something else entirely. It would take a second chance. The sheriff's office contacted the DNA Doe Project, an organization that had become something of a last resort for law enforcement agencies across the country. Founded on the principle that everyone deserves to be identified, even in death, the DNA Doe Project brings together investigative genetic genealogists who work entirely without payment. These volunteers combine DNA science with old-fashioned genealogical research, using public databases and family trees to identify the unidentified. The case was submitted, and a DNA profile was carefully developed from the bone. In January 2026, 4 years after the bone was discovered, the profile was uploaded to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database. This is where the real work began. A team of volunteers immediately pulled the case. They had no way of knowing they were about to solve a mystery that had defied conventional investigation for more than 2 decades. What they began with was simply a DNA profile and the determination to find answers. The volunteers started combing through family connections in the database. They traced genetic links, built family trees, and followed every lead with methodical precision. The pattern that emerged was unusual. They found connections to a family that had migrated from the East Coast to California, eventually settling in the San Diego area. As the team dug deeper into the descendants of this family, one name surfaced: Walter Carl Kinney. Born in San Diego in 1940, Kinney had lived a quiet life. He had worked as a banker, building a career in the financial world. At some point, he had relocated north to Santa Rosa, not far from where that mysterious bone had washed up on Salmon Creek Beach. On the surface, there was no obvious connection between Walter Carl Kinney and a John Doe found in 2022. But something about the genealogical connections made the volunteers believe they were onto something. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. One of the team members, searching through old investigative records, came across an article about human remains that had washed ashore in 1999, just 2 miles south of Salmon Creek, in Bodega Bay. This discovery had also been investigated. This case had also yielded human remains with no clear identity. The timing was too perfect to ignore, too specific, too close to ignore. The team dug deeper into that 1999 case. In 2003, 4 years after those remains were found, a woman had contacted investigators. She was looking for her father, Walter Carl Kinney. She had information that he had last been seen on August 10, 1999. She believed the remains found in Bodega Bay might belong to him. When investigators had cross-referenced her father's dental and X-ray records against the 1999 remains, they had found a match. Those were Walter Kinney's remains. The man had been identified. The case had been closed as far as anyone knew, but here was the stunning revelation. Walter Kinney, already identified once from remains found in 1999, had now become a John Doe a second time. The bone discovered on Salmon Creek Beach in 2022 belonged to him as well. The same man, the same mystery, separated by 23 years and several miles of ocean. The DNA Doe Project team had solved the case in just 8 days. They presented their findings to the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, who confirmed the identification through forensic comparison. What had once been an anonymous bone in the sand was finally given back its identity. Salmon Creek John Doe was, without question, Walter Carl Kinney. Tracy Anders, the team leader for the DNA Doe Project, described the case with a mixture of disbelief and professional satisfaction. "This case was unusual," she said. "It's not often we see someone end up as a John Doe twice." The statement seems almost understated given the bizarre reality of what had occurred. A man had been identified from remains, his case closed, only to be reduced to anonymity once again. A John Doe in a new location with a new bone, separated from the first discovery by more than 2 decades. The closure this identification brought to Kinney's family was significant, even if it came far too late. His daughter had been waiting more than 27 years for answers about her father. She remembered him as smart, sensitive, almost to a fault. In an interview, she offered insight into the man her father had been and perhaps unintentionally into the circumstances of his disappearance. "This world was just too harsh a place for him," she said. Those words hung heavy in the air. They suggested resignation. They suggested a man who struggled with the weight of existence itself, but they raised questions that remain unanswered to this day. What exactly happened to Walter Carl Kinney on August 10, 1999? The official record indicates he vanished from Santa Rosa. Within weeks, human remains attributed to him appeared in Bodega Bay, bearing signs of being in the water. The identification was made through X-ray and dental records. A body had been recovered. A death had been investigated. But how did he die? Was it an accident? Was it suicide, as his daughter's words seemed to hint? Or was there something more sinister involved? And then there is the second bone discovered 23 years later on Salmon Creek Beach. How did it separate from the rest of his remains? Over what vast stretch of ocean did it travel? Was it always in the water, slowly drifting for more than 2 decades? Or did it come from somewhere else entirely? How much time had actually passed since this bone had been exposed to the elements? The Sonoma County Sheriff's Office ultimately confirmed the identification, and the case was resolved. But resolved is perhaps not the right word. The mystery of how Walter Carl Kinney died, truly died, remains locked away in the details of a decades-old investigation that may never be fully public. The genetic genealogists who identified him have their answers, but the public does not. The family has closure, but perhaps not complete clarity. What remains certain is that Walter Carl Kinney was a real person who lived a real life, and that real person vanished without clear explanation in 1999. His remains scattered across the California coast, fragments of a life that the ocean slowly gave back, one bone at a time. And it took volunteers working for free, armed with DNA science and genealogical databases, to ensure that this man was not simply forgotten as a John Doe. Twice. The DNA Doe Project continues its work, bringing home the unidentified, one case at a time. But Walter Carl Kinney's story remains a haunting reminder that sometimes solving the mystery of identity is not the same as solving the mystery of what truly happened. And sometimes the answers we find lead only to deeper questions that may never be answered at all.